sometimes when we've done inner work, we have this expectation that we should know what our calling is. And we think to ourselves, I've done all this work, I've put in all this effort, I worked really hard, and I should know what my calling is by consequence. And it doesn't work like that. And there's lots of people, and they've done a lot of inner work, and they don't yet know what their calling is. And it even often causes them to continue doing more and more and more inner work. And it can lead to this really vicious cycle where they never come into an awareness of what they're meant to be doing with their life. They're spending years and years and years trying to figure it out. And though they gain really interesting, valuable insights into themselves, they never get going on their path. And I want to talk about this because if you are in the situation where you have been doing a lot of inner work and you don't yet know what your calling is, then I want you to come into an awareness of what it is so that you can get going on knowing exactly what you're meant to pursue with this lifetime. And my name is Joe Yuli. I'm a philosopher. I'm absolutely obsessed with vocations and callings. This is my thing. This is what I do. And that's why I'm here on places like YouTube, Substack. I have a podcast called the Crocodiles Podcast. That's why I host an online community that helps people to choose the right career path with conviction by unearthing their very own career archetype, because every single person has a calling. It's just a matter of bringing this calling into conscious awareness and then pursuing it. And a lot of the people that I work with, they come to me having done so much inner work. Now, I love inner work. I think it is amazing that the world has shifted in such a way where they are now taking inner work seriously. People are facing traumas seriously, processing that information. I mean, I remember a lot of guys that I used to play rugby with back in the day, and many of them, would just have all these emotional blockages in them. And now, when I bump into them and they're telling me about how they're processing their emotions, how they're now coming to a state of deeper inner peace, I'm like, this is amazing. This is great. And so I'm such a big fan of inner work. I'm such a big fan of people reflecting on themselves, trying to understand themselves at a deeper level. And, just the philosopher in me with the connection to the ancient maxim, know thyself, is just loving that people are getting more and more into inner work, trying to understand themselves, trying to heal themselves, and really moving forward in a way that I think is better for humanity, better for the collective in general. So this isn't to say that doing inner work is a bad thing. It's not. It's amazing. We should be very happy that people are doing inner work. If you yourself have done inner work, you should be proud of that. You should really take that on, that you are a part of this new group of people, this new generation that are moving things forward because they're willing to confront the side of themselves. But, and there is a but, when it comes to your calling, doing inner work often isn't enough. And it isn't enough mainly because the aims of the inner work that people are doing don't necessarily tie into the vocation. The vocation, by the way, if you've never heard of that term, a vocation is your sacred calling. That's what you're born to do. It's the work that needs to be done that can only come through you. And doing inner work often has an aim in and of itself. There are particular modalities that take people in particular directions. And so the first thing is to clear this up, whereby we think that any type of inner work is going to take us closer to knowing our calling or our purpose, unless it's specified, right? And often singular in focus, it's going to take us somewhere else. Now, that space where it takes us might be really great for us, might be great for our spiritual growth, our emotional growth, our relationships, how we navigate the world. It might have so much usefulness to it. But is it going to give you your calling? Probably not, unfortunately. I remember I worked with a student, and she asked me, and she said, I went overseas. I did ayahuasca. It was incredible. I had an amazing experience. I felt more connected to my own spirituality. I felt more connected with being here in the world. I didn't see it as this place where I just wanted to reject and run away from and, go off to the moon. And having that experience was so vital for me as an individual. But it didn't tell me what my purpose was. It didn't tell me what I was meant to be doing. It was very frustrating. And this often happens because that experience isn't necessarily going to tell you what your calling is. It's going to give you something else, and it's not trying to tell you what your calling is. Now, you might be able to go in with the intention, and maybe you can get in conversation with that experience and find out what your calling is. But most people that have that experience don't come out of it with knowing exactly what they're meant to be doing with this lifetime. The closest that people come to when they have one of those experiences, and people have told me, is that they get told what to leave or what to drop. Like, hey, you have to quit the job, or hey, you have to leave the relationship in order to pursue something greater. These kinds of things can happen on those types of experiences. And another one that people will often do is they'll start to do shadow work, right? They'll start to look into shadowed sides of themselves that they've neglected and they don't want to look at, but they know that in some way they need to look at it, that they've maybe heard of integration, and they want to bring that into understanding who they are, bring this into union. And so they do a lot of shadow work. Maybe this shadow work has to do with them trusting the divine, and they don't want to trust. They want to hold on to logical rationality, hold on to the mind, and they start to work on the shadow side of themselves and tap into that side. And they do some of that work, and then suddenly they start to trust more in the higher domains, more in the mystical side of existence. And they do that, and they integrate more of that into their being. And then they're like, but I still don't know what my calling is. I know that I need to be engaged with spirituality, or I know that this side of myself has to come in to my work. But what does that look like? How do I walk that? I can't see it clearly. It's foggy. I have many different directions that I could go in. It's fractured. And there is just this inability to see it, right? Because shadow work, once again, it's not to find your calling. Shadow work is so that you bring light onto the darker sides of yourself so that you can integrate it and be a more fully realized human, right? It's this Jungian idea of individuation, which once again isn't about pursuing one's calling. It's about coming to yourself, coming into wholeness. Another common one that people do is they'll do journaling. Journaling, once again, it's amazing. And it's a very particular type of self-knowledge. It's a reflective form of self-knowledge. And people will get really into journaling because they're able to reflect consciously on what is happening in quite close periods, right? So there's a closed feedback loop going on where the day happens and they reflect on the day, and then they can map it out and like, okay, that's what happened. And so that feedback loop is really, really tight. And by having that tight feedback loop, they can start to see patterns over time. Really useful tool, really great for inner work. But people that have been journaling often don't know what their path is. It's not the route to knowing what their path is. And so when we pursue inner work in this way, right, we're pursuing it through shadow work, we're pursuing it through going overseas, having an experience, reflecting on that experience, through journaling, through going over particular types of trauma, surfacing that up, staring at it, understanding it, coming to grips with it, healing it within and of ourselves. When we go through this stuff, what ends up happening is that we end up getting a clearer understanding of who we are. We have a clearer understanding of our identity, of ourselves, of our place in the world. So it's only natural that people think that this should also create an understanding into direction. What is my path? So there's a problem here. And the problem is that the information gathered on your identity may not be the information required to give you a clear understanding of the path. Because there is so much information that you have about yourself. There is so much information that is going in different directions towards different aims, that the information that we need in order to find what your calling is might be neglected, diluted, might not be in your basket, so to speak. Now, this is a real problem because people that do inner work, typically when they come into wanting to know what their purpose is or their calling is, they don't have a clear aim. It's not, I want to find my calling, and that is what I'm focusing on. Oftentimes, it's the consequence thereof. It's like, if I do this inner work, then I should find my calling. And so if you imagine an archer, right? They have a bow, they have an arrow, and they're pulling it back. And now I want you to imagine that that archer is staring at a target, right? Just a singular target. And they got their bow and arrows, like it's loaded, right? And then suddenly, 2 more targets pop up, right? One's on the left, one's on the right. So now there's 3 targets. How much harder is it for the archer to select the target to hit now that 2 more targets have come into existence? It's a lot harder because there's more options. So we have to get rid of these other options. Option 1, option 2, option 3, get rid of 2 of them, we need 1 of them. And the one that people need when they've done a lot of inner work and they still can't find their calling is you need to focus on and aim for, what is my calling? You need to focus on that. Because the moment that you focus on that, then all the inner work that you've done so far starts to come up, and you start to say, okay, well, how is that used in service of knowing what my calling is? And what you'll often find is that you have a lot of inner work and a lot of material, a lot of self-knowledge that doesn't actually give you what you need in order to know what your calling is. Which means you need to go through another period of self-knowledge gathering, but this time it's very intentional. It's like, I'm going to go and gather all this self-knowledge, right? Put it in my basket. You can act like somebody that is on a farm that's going out there and they're gathering the fruits of their labor, gathering all the self-knowledge, putting it into your basket. And by doing that, you start to build up the right material that you need in order to know what your calling is. Because there's very particular types of self-knowledge that you need to know in order to know what your calling is. It's one of the reasons why most people can't figure out what their calling is through inner work. It's because they gathered material that's not very useful, right? It's like they've gathered broccoli, they've gathered sweet potatoes, they've gathered rice, and they're trying to make a chocolate cake. It's like, that's not going to work for this. You can try, don't serve it to me, I will not eat it, but that's what it's like, right? So they've gathered all this material that's useful, right? It's useful to gather rice and broccoli and sweet potato, but don't try to make a chocolate cake, right? Try to make a delicious home roast meal. And having this clear aim starts to clarify everything up. Like, oh, okay, I need to focus on my calling and figure out what this is, right? Clear aim, so that the person that's shooting the arrow can hit the target. Now, this gathering is such a crucial stage for people because they've typically gathered a lot of information when they've done a lot of inner work. However, they need to start to step into domains typically that they haven't touched before because there's information that they do not know about that they need to gather. One of these domains is understanding your interests. This is a really big one. A lot of people I work with have many different interests and they don't understand their interests. They know that they're interested in it, but they don't understand why. They don't understand the components of the interest that pull them in and why those are important to their calling. So those aren't even in their basket, right? Because you're not going to really discern your interests by going through shadow work. You're not really going to discern your interests by going and really going through some sort of like trauma therapy. You're really not going to discern your interests in journaling, right? You're probably going to go over past experience. You might go over some frustrations, but it's not really getting at the core of the type of self-knowledge that you need. And there are a lot of different categories of self-knowledge that you need in order to even gather the right material to make the right cake. And so the analogy that I like to think of in the way that people that do inner work go about their inner work through is it's like they're on a beach and they've got a metal detector, and they're going around, and it's like, and they're like, oh, like that's something, and it's like, okay, that's a coin, and then they keep going, and then they find something else. It's like, oh, that's just a piece of scrap metal, but well, whatever, I'll gather that. And at the end of the day, they've got, a coin, $1 or $2. They've got a rag doll. They've got, some kid's half-broken sand bucket, and they have some seashells. Right? So there's sort of some value there. There's a little bit of stuff that's not really going to help us. So when through the lens of I need to choose my calling, right? I need to know exactly what it is. A lot of the self-knowledge that you have is not going to be very useful, right? It's useful for something else, but it's not useful for our aim. And so we need to find stuff that is useful for our aim. And going through these different categories that are often, untouched because of the form that most inner work takes is so vital. And so like I mentioned, multiple different interests, understanding them, decoding them, breaking them down, it's just one category. And there's a lot of other different categories that you need to go through to collect in order to know what your calling is. And let's say as well that you had all the material, because it's not enough to have all the material. You also need to be able to bring it into a coherent form. So you need to bring it into coherent form. And what I mean by that is, similar to this example of someone making a cake, right? If you gather the right ingredients, you've gathered some milk, some flour, some eggs, some sugar, some store-bought topping to make it taste nice because you didn't quite know exactly how to make the topping. And you go ahead and you have all the ingredients, you still need to put it through a process, right? You still need to whisk it all up, put it in the cake tray, place it in the oven, make it for 20, 30 minutes, pull it out. That's probably the extent of my knowledge. If any one of you is into cake and you're hearing this and you're thinking, what is this guy talking about? It's for an analogy. It's for the purpose of explaining my point. Please don't get on me for my cake mixing abilities. And it needs to go through a process. So when you're gathering the correct self-knowledge material, you then need to put it through a process to properly synthesize it, to properly bring everything into coherence. Because I've also met people and seen people that have gathered the right pieces of self-knowledge. It's all there. They just don't have the process in order to put it through to come to the right understanding of what it is. So one example of one step that I'll often get people to put this information through is to split up intuition and feeling and say, go through all of your self-knowledge, right? And first, I want you to go through it in a way of feeling. How does this particular piece of self-knowledge make me feel? So if we were to think about someone that's split between, I'm really into writing, but I'm also really into healing. And the writing part of me, loves words, loves to place experience into the form of words. I love the aesthetics of words. I love how ideas are shaped through stories. And they're also looking over here. I really love to serve people, heal people, research about healing, and these two things feel very, very distinct. If we look at it through the lens of feeling, like how does writing make you feel? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel, you're like, I don't know if I like it. Does it make you feel as though you're progressing when you're writing, as though you're moving forward? Like how does it make you feel? Same thing for healing. Well, maybe you feel good because you're of service, but you don't feel quite yourself because you're a bit distant when you're having to serve others. How does it make you feel, right? So this is one way of viewing this. But then we might say, intuitively, which one do you think is more correct for you? Just off the cuff, think about writing. Is it a yes or a no? And the person instinctually is like, yes, right? And healing, instinctually, do you think yes or no? And they're like, yes, right? It's like, okay, both yeses. It means that they need to work together in some way. As an example, but that's through intuition, feeling, it's different. And so we have a process going on. And so it doesn't mean that just because your intuition said that that's correct, that is correct. Because we're also looking at feeling, and feeling is telling us something different, right? So this is just an example of going through a process of the information. And we've got a lot of different steps that we need to go through in order to take that self-knowledge and really understand what our calling is. And so this is why people that do inner work, that have been spending, years and years on it, don't know what their calling or what their path is. One, because they haven't gathered the right self-knowledge, because they didn't know, and they didn't have the clear aim to do it. And then the other reason is because even if they have the self-knowledge, they don't know how to bring it into form, right? They don't know how to take the ingredients and make it a cake. And because of that, it means that they end up going, oh, okay, well, maybe I just need to do more inner work, right? Gather more ingredients. And so I have met people where they've just got like a ton of inner work going on over here, and then they haven't got past stage one of their path. And it's like, oh, if you just got past a couple of steps, you have so much to give. But you need to take that information and put it through a process so that you can come to an awareness of what you're meant to be doing in this lifetime and how your path needs you to step into life and into existence. So this is this idea where a lot of people think, and this is a belief that a lot of people have, well, your calling, your purpose, it takes years and years and years to figure out. That is not true. It takes weeks. However, those weeks are intense, and you really need to go through a particular process in order to come to an arrival point where you have that moment of revelation of like, this is my calling. This is what I'm meant to be doing with my life. This is meant for me, right? When you have that moment, then you can start taking those steps forward. And so if you are interested in how I help people and guide people to choose the right career path with conviction by unearthing their own career archetype, we have over 450 plus career archetypes now within our community, and that list is growing because members that come into our course and community and they go through this process of unearthing, they can often find that their career archetype isn't even on the list. So our list is always growing. It's very personalized. You get your specific one. And we go through these different forms of self-knowledge. Some of the forms include astrology, Jungian psychology, biography, decoding your interests, going over your own psychological barriers, understanding social feedback, understanding the life mythology that is running underneath. There's a particular storyline running underneath your life that you need to understand in order to walk your path. And we go over this so that you can actually walk your path in the world in a way that brings in money, right? You need money in order to survive and also thrive and live a lifestyle that you lead, right? So we get at the soul, and the soul is the foundation, and then we build it into a structure that actually works for you. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link below and you can check it out.